The blood on the floor of St. Jude's North Ward didn't belong to a patient, and the woman standing over the body, holding a scalpel with the precision of a surgeon and the cold eyes of a killer, wasn't a doctor. For 3 years, the staff of St. Jude's thought Elena Vance was just the quiet night nurse who changed IV bags and dodged eye contact. They thought she was timid. They thought she was weak. They were wrong. When a heavily armed man locked down the 4th floor with 20 hostages, he thought he was the hunter. He didn't know he had just locked himself in a cage with a ghost. This is the story of the night the predator became the prey. It was a Tuesday in November when the rain started a cold, relentless sheet of water hammering against the glass facade of St. Jude's Memorial Hospital in Seattle. In sight on the 4th floor, trauma and post-op, the air smelled of floor wax and antiseptic. It was do 2 hours. The graveyard shift. Elena Vance sat at the nurse's station, the blue light of the monitor reflecting in her dark, unblinking eyes. To the casual observer, Elna was invisible. She was 34 with mouse-brown hair, pulled back into a severe fraying bun. She walked with a slight shuffle, shoulders hunched as if trying to occupy as little space in the world as possible. She spoke in a whisper. She never argued with the doctors. "She's a robot, I swear," whispered Sarah Jenkins, a 22-year-old nurse, fresh out of college, scrolling through TikTok on her phone at the other end of the desk. "I asked her what she did this weekend, and she said, laundry." Who does laundry for 48 hours? Dr. Marcus Halloway, the lead trauma surgeon on call, didn't even look up from his charts. "As long as she preps the meds correctly, Sarah, I don't care if she stares at a wall. Just keep her away from the families. She has the bedside manner of a wet mop." Halloway was brilliant, arrogant, and tired. He had just finished a 6-hour vascular repair on a gunshot victim from downtown and was running on caffeine and ego. He didn't notice things about people like Elena. He didn't notice that while she shuffled her feet, never made a sound. He didn't notice that when a tray dropped in the cafeteria 3 floors down, Elena didn't jump. She shifted her weight to the balls of her feet, her eyes darting to the exits before anyone else registered the noise. He didn't notice the scar tissue running like a jagged road map from her collarbone down her right shoulder, hidden beneath her scrub top. Elena typed her notes. Patient in 404 stable. Vitals normal. Drip replaced. She wasn't bored. She was vigilant. Old habits didn't die. They just went dormant. 7 years ago, Elena Vance wasn't wiping brows. She was Staff Sergeant Vance, attached to a cultural support team, CST, working alongside the 75th Ranger Regiment in the Pesh Valley, Afghanistan. She had cleared compounds in total darkness. She had treated sucking chest wounds while taking fire from a ridgeline 300 meters away. She had left that life behind, or so she told herself. "Hey, Vance," Sarah chirped, popping gum. "Can you take the trash down to the chute? It's creeping me out being near the elevator alone." Elena looked up, her face blank. "Sure." She stood up. No wasted movement. She grabbed the heavy bags, her forearms flexing cords of muscle rippling unexpectedly under her pale skin, before she slumped her shoulders again, hiding her strength. She walked down the long, dim hallway. The storm outside was picking up thunder, rattling the windows. As she reached the utility room near the elevator bank, she heard it. It wasn't a sound that belonged in a hospital. It wasn't a gurney wheel squeaking or a pager beeping. It was the metallic clack slide of a bolt carrier group being sent home on a rifle. Eleanor froze. The shuffle vanished. Her spine straightened. Her chin dropped. She didn't breathe. Ding. The elevator doors at the end of the hall slid open. Elena stepped backward into the shadows of the utility room, leaving the door cracked just an inch. Through the sliver of light she watched. A man stepped out. He was big, 6'4", easily 250 pounds. He wore a heavy trench coat soaked in rain-heavy boots and a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. But it was what he held in his hands that made Elena's blood turn to ice, then immediately to fire. An AR-15 platform rifle. Modified. Short barrel, holographic sight. This wasn't a gangbanger with a cheap piece. This was a man who knew his equipment. He didn't look crazy. He looked calm. Elena watched as he walked past her hiding spot, heading straight for the nurse's station. He didn't rush. He moved with a heavy, purposeful gait. Elena looked at her wrist. No Apple Watch. An old, battered G-Shock. Do 14. She touched her pocket. Her phone was back at the desk. She was unarmed. She was in a dead-end utility room, and a wolf had just walked into the sheep pen. The silence of the ward was shattered not by a scream, but by a voice that boomed like a thunderclap. "Nobody move!" From her vantage point in the dark utility room, Elena saw the scene unfold down the corridor. Dr. Halloway dropped his chart. Sarah Jenkins froze her phone, slipping from her hand and clattering onto the linoleum. The gunman whose name the world would soon learn was Silas Thorne, kicked the locking mechanism of the double doors leading to the waiting room, jamming a rubber wedge under them. He had just sealed the floor. "Hands on the desk, now!" Thorne roared, raising the rifle. Sarah screamed a high-pitched, terrifying sound. "Please, I don't—" Bam! Thorne didn't shoot her. He fired a single round into the ceiling. The sound in the confined hallway was deafening. Dust and ceiling tiles rained down on the pristine floor. The echo slammed against the walls, disorienting everyone. "Next one goes in a kneecap," Thorne yelled. "Where is he? Where is Halloway?" Dr. Halloway, usually the god of his domain, was trembling. He raised his hands slowly, his face the color of ash. I'm Dr. Halloway." Thorne turned the weapon toward the surgeon. "You remember me?" "Doctor, you remember Mary Thorne 3 years ago. Table 4, you said it was a routine bypass. You said she'd be home for Christmas." Halloway stammered, his eyes wide. I operate on thousands of people. I don't—" "You killed her," Thorne screamed, the calm facade cracking to reveal a jagged edge of grief and rage. "You were drunk. The nurses whispered about it. I spent 3 years finding the proof. And tonight we're going to have a trial, Doctor." Thorne swung the rifle back to Sarah. "You. Get the patients out of the rooms. Everyone in the hallway. Now anyone who can't walk, you drag them." Elena, still in the utility room, felt her heart rate spike, not from fear, but from the adrenaline dump. Tachypsychia set in. Time seemed to slow down. She assessed the threat. Target male heavy build. Weapon AR-15, likely semi-auto 30-round mag. He has a sidearm on his hip, looks like a 1911. Hostiles 1 visible. Friendlies. 2 staff visible, roughly 12 patients in the wing. Environment confined space. Hard cover limited to the nurse's desk. She needed to move. If she stayed in the closet, she was useless. If she charged him now from 50 feet away with 0 cover, she was dead. She needed to become part of the scene. She needed to get close. Elena took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a split second and flipped the switch. Staff Sergeant Vance receded. Timorous Nurse Ellie came forward. She pushed the utility door open and stumbled out, dropping the trash bags loudly. Thorne spun around, the rifle snapping toward her. "Freeze!" Elena threw her hands up, trembling violently. She hunched her shoulders, making herself look smaller, pathetic. She let her mouth hang open in terrified shock. "Don't shoot!" she wailed, her voice cracking. "Please, I'm just the nurse. I was just taking out the trash." Thorne eyed her. He saw the fraying scrubs, the messy hair, the absolute terror in her posture. He saw prey. He didn't see the way her eyes were scanning the mag well of his rifle to see if the safety was on. It wasn't. He didn't see her gauging the distance between him and the scalpel tray on the crash cart. "Get over here," Thorne barked, gesturing with the barrel. "Move!" Elena scrambled forward, tripping over her own feet, a calculated move to lower his guard. She joined Sarah and Halloway at the desk. Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably. Elena grabbed Sarah's hand, squeezing it hard. "It's okay," Elena whispered, her voice shaking for show, but her grip like a vice. "Just breathe." "Shut up!" Thorne yelled. He reached into his duffel bag and pulled out a bundle of heavy-duty zip ties. He threw them at Elena. "You, the ugly one!" Thorne sneered at Elena. "Tie them up, hands behind their backs. If you leave them loose, I kill the girl first." Elena picked up the zip ties. Her hands were steady until she noticed him watching. Then she forced them to shake. This was a mistake. He was giving her freedom of movement. He was letting the wolf walk among the sheep because he thought she was a dog. As Elena moved behind Dr. Halloway to bind his wrists, she leaned in close to his ear. "Doctor," she whispered, so low only he could hear her voice, suddenly devoid of any fear, stripped of any stutter. It was a voice of pure, cold command. "When the lights go out, drop to the floor and cover your head. Do not move until I say clear." Halloway turned his head, slightly confusion warring with terror in his eyes. "What? Tighten your muscles," she ordered, cinching the zip tie. She left it just loose enough that he could torque his wrists, but tight enough to look secure. She moved to Sarah. "Sarah," she whispered, "I need you to be brave. Can you do that? I'm going to die." Sarah sobbed. "No, you're not," Elena said. She secured Sarah's wrists. "Because I'm here. Hey, less talking." Thorne racked the slide of his pistol to make a point. Elena stood up and turned to face the gunman. She was 5 feet away from him. He towered over her. "They're tied," Elena whimpered, clasping her hands in front of her chest, a submissive pose that also kept her hands ready near her centerline. "Good," Thorne said. He looked at the clock. 02:25. "Now we wait for the police. And the cameras." He turned his back to her for a fraction of a second to check the window. Elena's eyes shifted to the master power breaker panel, located just behind the nurse's station desk. It was 20 feet away. Too far. She needed a weapon. Her eyes landed on the desk. A pen, a stapler, a pair of trauma shears. Thorne turned back around. "You. Go check on the patients. Bring them out here. If anyone tries to run, I start shooting the doctor." Elena nodded frantically. "Oh, okay. I'll go." She turned and walked down the hall toward the patient rooms. As soon as she broke the line of sight around the corner, the shuffle vanished again. She moved with lethal speed. She ducked into room 402. Mrs. Gable, an 80-year-old with a hip fracture, was waking up confused by the noise. "Shh, Mrs. Gable," Elena said softly. She moved to the bedside table. She wasn't looking for medicine. She was looking for chemistry. She grabbed a bottle of rubbing alcohol isopropyl. She grabbed a lighter from Mrs. Gable's purse. The woman was a secret smoker. She grabbed a handful of gauze pads. She looked at the ceiling, the fire suppression system. If she triggered the sprinklers, the chaos would be absolute. But the water would make the floor slick bad for footing. She had a better idea. She moved to the supply closet at the end of the hall. She found what she needed, a portable oxygen tank and a defibrillator unit. Elena Vance checked the charge on the defibrillator. Full. She ripped the sleeves off her scrub top, tying the fabric tight around her knuckles to protect them. She took a deep breath. The Ranger Creed echoed in the back of her mind. I will never leave a fallen comrade to fall into the hands of the enemy. She stepped back out into the hallway. Hey! Thorne shouted from the station. What's taking so long? Elena walked back toward the light, but she wasn't hunched over anymore. She was walking tall. In her right hand, hidden behind her leg, she held the trauma shears she had swiped from a cart in the hall. In her left, she gripped a glass vial of succinylcholine, a paralytic agent. I had to help Mrs. Gable, Eleanor called out. Her voice was different now. It carried. It was steady. Thorne squinted. He sensed the shift. The air in the room changed. The prey wasn't acting like prey anymore. Stop right there. Thorne raised the rifle. Elena stopped. She was 10 meters away. You look different, Thorne said, narrowing his eyes. It's the lighting, Elena said flatly. Get on your knees, Thorne commanded. Elena looked him dead in the eye. No. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm outside. Halloway gasped. Sarah stopped crying, staring at Elena in disbelief. What did you say to me? Thorne whispered, stepping forward, the rifle aimed at her chest. I said no, Elena repeated. She shifted her weight. And you should have checked the back exit, Silas. Thorne flinched his head, jerking instinctively toward the hallway behind him. It was a lie. There was no back exit unlocked. But the distraction bought her 0.5 seconds. Elena moved. The human eye takes roughly 150 milliseconds to process a visual stimuli, and another 100 milliseconds to send a motor signal to the muscles. In the world of close-quarters battle, a quarter of a second is an eternity. It is the difference between life and a folded flag. When Silas Thorne turned his head to check the imaginary back exit, he gave Eleanor that quarter second. She didn't run. Running triggers the predator reflex to chase. Instead, she exploded forward in a low crouch, covering the 10 meters between them with terrifying speed. She wasn't moving like a nurse. She was moving like a projectile. Thorne realized the ruse instantly. His head snapped back, his finger tightening on the trigger of the AR-15. Crack! A round went off, but his aim was high. The bullet shattered the fluorescent light fixture above Elena's head, showering the hallway in sparks and glass. Elena didn't flinch. She slid on her knees for the last meter coming in under the barrel of the rifle. She didn't go for his face. She went for the weapon, her left hand still gripping the glass vial of succinylcholine, smashed upward against the handguard of the rifle, forcing the muzzle toward the ceiling. Simultaneously, her right hand holding the trauma shears drove downward. She wasn't trying to stab him. The trench coat was too thick. She jammed the shears into the ejection port of the rifle, twisting violently. Metal screeched against metal. The bolt carrier group jammed. The rifle was now a 10-pound club. Thorn roared, a sound of pure animal rage. He released the rifle with one hand and backhanded Elena across the face. The blow was heavy. It lifted her off the floor and sent her skidding across the wax tiles. She tasted copper. Her vision blurred for a microsecond. "You bitch!" Thorn screamed. He racked the charging handle, but the shears were wedged deep. The gun was dead. He dropped the rifle and reached for the 1911 pistol on his hip. Elena shook the cobwebs from her head. She was on the floor, 5 feet away. She couldn't beat him to the draw. She looked at Holloway and Sarah, who were frozen in horror. "Run!" Elena screamed, her voice cutting through the ringing in their ears. "Get to the stairwell!" The command broke their paralysis. Holloway grabbed Sarah by the arm, dragging her toward the fire exit. Thorn pulled the pistol. He leveled it at the fleeing doctor. Elena grabbed the nearest object, a heavy-wheeled IV stand, and shoved it with all her strength. It rolled into Thorn's legs just as he fired. Bang! The shot went wide, burying itself in the drywall next to Sarah's head. They burst through the stairwell doors, disappearing into the concrete safety of the escape route. Now it was just Elena and Thorn. Thorn turned his attention back to her. His eyes were maniacal. He raised the pistol. Elena rolled. Bang! Bang! 2 rounds chewed up the floor tiles where she had been a second ago. She scrambled behind the nurse's station desk, putting the heavy laminate counter between her and the bullets. "I see you," Thorn yelled, walking slowly toward the desk. "You think you're a hero. You're just a dead nurse." Elena pressed her back against the inner wall of the desk. She checked her body. No holes, just a swelling jaw and bruised ribs. She looked at the counter above her. He was coming around the left side. She needed to change the environment. She needed darkness. She looked at the computer terminal on the desk. The uninterruptible power supply, UPS battery backup, was sitting on the floor. Heavy. Lead acid. She could hear his boots crunching on the broken glass. Crunch. Crunch. He was 6 feet away. Elena ripped the power cord of the UPS from the wall. She grabbed the unit, counting the footsteps. Crunch. 4 feet. Crunch. 2 feet. Elena stood up, not away from him, but into him, as Thorn rounded the corner of the desk, expecting her to be cowering on the floor. He found her standing. Before he could raise the pistol, she swung the UPS unit like a medieval flail. It connected with his wrist. There was a sickening crack of bone. Thorn screamed and dropped the pistol. It skittered across the floor, sliding under a locked medicine cabinet. He was disarmed. But he was huge, and he was enraged. He didn't need a gun to kill her. He lunged, tackling her. They crashed into the wall behind the desk. The impact knocked the wind out of Elena. Thorn's hands, the size of hams, found her throat. He squeezed. Elena's vision began to tunnel. Black spots danced in her eyes. She clawed at his face, but he didn't flinch. He was running on pure adrenaline and psychosis. "Die!" He spat spittle flying onto her face. Elena couldn't breathe. Her trachea was compressing. Panic, the lizard brain reaction, tried to take over. Flail. Kick. Die. No. Elena forced her mind to focus. Technical. Anatomical. Target anterior neck. Objective break the hold. Method. Vagus nerve stimulation or ocular pressure. She stopped clawing at his face. She brought her thumbs to the inside of his elbows, digging into the tender nerve clusters. He grunted, but held on. She needed more. She brought her knees up to her chest, wedging them between her body and his. With a guttural cry, she extended her legs, driving her heels into his solar plexus. The force of the kick broke his grip. Thorne stumbled back, gasping for air. Elena dropped to the floor, gasping. Her throat burned like fire. She looked at the pistol under the cabinet. Too far, she looked at Thorne. He was recovering, shaking his head, his eyes fixing on her with renewed hatred. He pulled a combat knife from his boot, an 8-inch serrated blade. "Okay," Thorne wheezed, grinning through the pain. "Now it's fun." Elena scrambled backward, kicking open the door to the supply room behind the desk. She threw herself inside and slammed the door, locking the deadbolt just as Thorne's body slammed against it. Thud. "Open it!" Thorne screamed, slashing at the wood. "I'm going to carve you up!" Elena backed away from the door. She was trapped in a 10x10 supply room. No windows. One door. But she wasn't trapped. She was in the armory. This was a medical supply room. To a civilian, it was bandages and saline. To a ranger, it was a core of chemical and biological weapons. Elena looked around. Her breathing slowed. The fear evaporated, replaced by a wholed, calculating resolve. "You want to play in the dark?" she whispered to herself. She reached up and smashed the light bulb with the handle of a mop. The room plunged into pitch blackness. She moved to the shelves, her hands guided by muscle memory, and 3 years of stocking these shelves found what she needed. Ethanol, ammonia, bleach, a pressurized canister of freezing spray ethyl chloride. She heard Thorne outside. He was shooting the lock off the door with the rifle he had unjammed. Blam, blam. The wood splintered. The door kicked open. Thorne stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the hallway lights. He couldn't see into the black void of the supply room. "Come out, little nurse," he taunted, stepping into the darkness. Elena was gone. She had climbed the shelving unit and was pressed against the ceiling, silent as a spider. The hunt was on. Outside St. Jude's Hospital, the world had turned into a kaleidoscope of red and blue lights. SWAT teams from the Seattle Police Department had established a perimeter. Armored bearcats idled on the wet pavement. Snipers were positioning themselves on the rooftops of adjacent buildings, battling the driving rain to get a sightline into the 4th floor. Captain Miller, the incident commander, stood by the hood of his cruiser, looking at the blueprints of the hospital. "Status," he barked into his radio. "We have 2 hostages released," a voice crackled back. "Dr. Holloway and a nurse, Sarah Jenkins. They exited via the north stairwell." "Get them to the command post, now," Miller ordered. 5 minutes later, a trembling Sarah and a shell-shocked Dr. Holloway were wrapped in blankets, standing under the awning of the command tent. "Tell me what's happening up there," Miller said, his voice urgent. "How many shooters?" "1," Holloway said, his voice raspy. "Big guy. Heavy weapons. Who is still in there?" "Patients," Sarah sobbed. "And Elena." "Elena?" Miller asked. "Another nurse." "Yeah," Holloway said, wiping rain from his face. "But she's not just a nurse." Miller frowned. "What do you mean?" Holloway looked at the police captain, his eyes wide, with a mixture of confusion and awe. She took him apart. She jammed his rifle with a pair of scissors. She hit him with a battery backup. The way she moved. "Captain, I've seen soldiers before. Elena isn't a nurse. She's a war machine." Miller turned to his aide. "Run the name. Elena Vance. I want to know who is in that building." The aide typed furiously on a laptop. A moment later, he stopped. He looked up, his face pale. "Captain," the aide said, You're going to want to see this." Miller looked at the screen. Name, Vance Eleanor. Rank, Staff Sergeant, Rhett. Unit 75th Ranger Regiment Cultural Support Team. Decorations: Silver Star, 2 Purple Hearts. Notes: Honorable discharge following IED injury in Kandahar. Specializations include Sir. Survival, Evasion, Resistance and Escape Level C. Combat. Medic Close Quarters. Battle. Miller stared at the screen. He looked back up at the 4th floor where the lights were flickering. "God help that gunman," Miller muttered. "Stand down the entry team. We don't want to get in her way." The darkness was Elena's ally. She had lived in the dark for months at a time, in the mountains of the Hindu Kush. She knew how sound traveled in it. She knew how fear tasted in it. Thorn moved slowly into the room, leading with his knife. He was breathing heavy, a loud, rasping sound that gave away his position every second. "I know you're in here," he hissed. Elena hung from the top shelf of the metal rack, her legs wrapped around the uprights. She was directly above him. In her hand, she held a makeshift weapon, a 500 ml glass bottle of ether, wrapped in a towel. She waited. Thorn took another step. He was directly below her. Elena released her hold on the shelf with her legs and dropped. She didn't land on him. She landed behind him, silent as a cat. Thorn spun around, slashing the air with his knife. Elena ducked the blade, feeling the wind of it pass over her ear. She stepped in, jamming the towel-wrapped bottle of ether into his face. She smashed the glass against his nose. The bottle shattered. The liquid soaked the towel and his face. The fumes were instant and overpowering. Thorn gagged, flailing. He slashed blindly, the knife catching Elena's scrub top, slicing a thin line across her stomach. She ignored the pain. She held the towel over his face, riding his back as he thrashed like a bull. "Breathe deep," she whispered in his ear. Thorn's knees buckled. The ether was entering his bloodstream, depressing his central nervous system. His movements became sluggish. The knife dropped from his hand. He fell to his knees, then to his face. Eleanor rolled off him, gasping for fresh air. The fumes were making her dizzy too. She scrambled to the door, kicking it open to let the hallway light and air in. She looked back at Thorn. He was unconscious, a heap of wet trench coat and muscle on the floor. It was over, or so she thought. As Elena leaned against the doorframe, trying to catch her breath, the hospital's PA system crackled to life. "Code black, code black. Fire in the North Ward." Elena froze. Fire. She looked down the hall. Smoke was billowing from room 402, Mrs. Gable's room. Thorn must have set a charge or knocked over something flammable before he came for her. The fire alarm began to blare. The sprinklers kicked on, drenching the hallway in a deluge of grey water. Elena looked at Thorn. He was out cold. She could leave him. She could run. But the patients were still in their rooms. And then she saw it. Thorn's hand moved. He wasn't out. He was faking. Or he had a tolerance that defied medical science. Thorn roared, pushing himself up from the chemical puddle. His face was red, his eyes bloodshot and streaming tears. But he was alive. And he was holding a detonator. "If I go..." Thorn coughed, blood and ether dripping from his face. "Everyone goes." He held up a small black device. "C4, he rasped. "In the oxygen storage." The oxygen storage room. If that went up, it wouldn't just be a fire. It would be a crater. It would take out the entire north side of the hospital. Elena looked at the detonator. She looked at the distance between them. 10 feet. She looked at her own hands. Empty. "Drop it," Elena said. "No." Thorne smiled a gruesome, broken expression. "I want to see the sky fall." He moved his thumb toward the button. Elena didn't think. She didn't plan. She reacted. She grabbed the only thing left on her person. The pen in her pocket. A standard-issue, cheap plastic ballpoint pen. She threw it. It wasn't a throwing knife. It shouldn't have worked. But Elena Vance had spent hours throwing rocks at tin cans in the boredom of the desert. The pen tumbled through the air and struck Thorne, directly in the eye he hadn't rubbed the ether out of. It didn't kill him, but the shock of a foreign object hitting his eyeball made him flinch. His hand jerked. The detonator flew from his grip, sliding across the wet floor toward the elevator shaft. "No!" Thorne screamed. He dove for it. Elena dove for him. They collided in the wet, smoky hallway, rolling over broken glass and water. It wasn't tactical anymore. It was a brawl. Thorne punched her in the ribs. She felt something crack. Elena headbutted him, her forehead smashing into his broken nose. He screamed, blinding him with pain. Elena scrambled on top of him. She trapped his arm. She wrapped her legs around his neck in a triangle choke. She squeezed. "Go to sleep," she gritted out, her face contorted with effort. "Go to sleep." Thorne thrashed. He clawed at her legs. He tried to stand up, lifting her off the ground with him. But Elena Vance was an army ranger. She held on. She squeezed until her own muscles screamed. Thorne's struggles slowed. His arm went limp. His head lolled back. Elena held it for another 10 seconds, just to be sure. Then she let go. Thorne dropped to the floor, motionless. Elena lay next to him, staring up at the sprinklers raining down on them. She was bleeding, bruised, and exhausted. She closed her eyes. "Clear," she whispered to the empty hall. But the night wasn't over. The fire in room 402 was growing. The smoke was getting thicker. And she had 12 patients who couldn't walk. Elena Vance stood up. She wiped the blood from her mouth. She grabbed Thorne's ankles and dragged him into the supply room, locking the door from the outside with a zip tie she found on the floor. Then she turned toward the fire. "Time to go to work," she said. The silence that followed the fight was short-lived. It was replaced by a sound far more terrifying than a gunshot, the roar of a fire finding its breath. The sprinklers were hissing, coating everything in a cold grey mist, but they were losing the battle. Room 402 wasn't just burning. It was an accelerant-fueled furnace. The black smoke billowed out into the corridor, rolling along the ceiling like an inverted ocean. It was thick, oily, and acrid, the smell of melting plastic and burning linen. Elena coughed, the taste of soot mixing with the copper taste of blood in her mouth. She forced herself to stand. Her ribs screamed in protest, likely 2 fractures from Thorne's boots. Her stomach burned from the knife graze. Her head swam from the ether fumes, but the ranger switch was still flipped on. Pain is information. Information is actionable. Ignore the pain, act on the objective. Objective 1. Contain the blast threat. Objective 2. Evacuate the non-ambulatory. Elena limped toward the oxygen storage room. It was adjacent to room 402. The wall separating them was already hot to the touch. Inside that room were 20 tanks of compressed oxygen. If the heat compromised the structural integrity of those tanks, or if the fire reached the C4 Thorne had planted, St. Jude's wouldn't just have a fire. It would have a hole in its side the size of a city block. She tried the handle of the oxygen room. Locked. She looked through the small reinforced window. She saw the brick of C4 taped to the main manifold. It wasn't wired to a timer. Thorne had lied, or rather the detonator she had kicked away was the only trigger. C4 is remarkably stable. You can shoot it or burn it, and it usually won't explode without a shock wave from a blasting cap. Usually. But the oxygen tanks were the real problem. If they ruptured from the heat, the pressure release would be catastrophic. Elena grabbed a stack of towels from a linen cart. She soaked them in the water pooling on the floor. She wedged them tightly into the crack under the oxygen room door, creating a seal to keep the superheated smoke out and insulate the room for a few more precious minutes. It was a band-aid on a bullet wound, but it bought time. She turned her attention to room 402. Mrs. Gable. The door to 402 was open, vomiting black smoke. The heat coming out of it was blistering. Elena took a breath of the relatively cleaner air near the floor, pulled the collar of her scrub top over her nose, and crawled in. Visibility was 0. The heat was oppressive, searing her skin. The orange glow of flames licked the curtains and the ceiling tiles. "Mrs. Gable!" Elena shouted into the roar. A weak cough answered her from the far side of the bed. Elena crawled on her elbows and knees, keeping below the thermal layer. She found the bed. It was empty. Mrs. Gable had tried to get out and fallen. Elena's hand brushed against soft fabric. A nightgown. "I've got at you," Elena grunted. She grabbed the elderly woman's wrist. Mrs. Gable was dead weight, terrified and semi-conscious from smoke inhalation. "My hip!" Mrs. Gable moaned. "I know. I'm sorry. This is going to hurt," Elena said. There was no time for gentleness. Elena grabbed Mrs. Gable by the back of her nightgown and dragged her across the floor. The heat was melting the soles of Elena's shoes. Her skin felt tight like it was shrinking. They reached the hallway. Elena heaved Mrs. Gable out into the wet, misty corridor, just as the ceiling tiles in room 402 collapsed in a shower of sparks. Elena rolled onto her back, gasping for air. The hallway air was bad, but compared to the room, it was sweet. She checked Mrs. Gable. Breathing. Pulse rapid. Burns on her arms. "Stay down," Elena ordered. She looked down the hall. The smoke layer was banking down, getting lower. In 5 minutes, the entire floor would be a kill box. There were 11 other rooms, 11 other patients. Some were post-op knees. Some were appendectomies. One was a car crash survivor in traction. Elena Vance stood up. She was alone. The fire department was minutes away, but minutes were a currency she didn't have. She needed a force multiplier. She ran to the nurse's station, grabbing the master key ring from the drawer. She unlocked the supply closet where she had stashed the unconscious Thorne. He was still out, breathing shallowly. She didn't look at him. She grabbed a pair of trauma shears and cut the zip ties on his ankles. She grabbed his heavy trench coat. She ran back to the hallway. She went to room 405. Mr. Henderson, a 250-pound man with a total knee replacement. "Nurse," he croaked, sitting up in bed, eyes wide with terror as smoke curled under his door. "Get up," Elena said. "I can't walk my knee." "I didn't ask you to walk," Elena said. She threw the heavy trench coat onto the floor. Get on the coat." "What?" "Get on the coat." Eleanor roared her voice, carrying the terrifying authority of a drill sergeant. Mr. Henderson scrambled out of bed, adrenaline overriding his pain, and flopped onto the trench coat. Elena grabbed the collar of the coat. It made a perfect sled. The wax floors, slick with water from the sprinklers, reduced the friction. She dug her heels in and pulled. Mr. Henderson slid into the hallway. "Hold Mrs. Gable's hand," Elena commanded, parking him next to the old woman. "Do not let go." She went to the next room, and the next. She was moving like a machine now. Breach. Secure. Extract. She used bedsheets. She used wheelchairs. She linked them together in the center of the hallway, away from the burning walls. The fire had breached the hallway ceiling now. Flaming debris dropped like rain. The heat was becoming unbearable. Elena had 10 patients in the train. 2 were missing. Room 410. A young boy, Leo, recovering from a ruptured spleen. Room 412. A comatose patient on a ventilator. The path to 410 was blocked by a wall of fire. The ceiling had partially collapsed. Elena looked at the fire. She looked at the water soaking her scrubs. She ran to the janitor's cart. She grabbed a bucket of water and dumped it over her own head. Then she took a deep breath, lowered her head, and ran straight through the wall of fire. Captain Miller of the Seattle SWAT team stood at the base of the stairwell on the ground floor. The blueprints were useless now. The radio reports were chaotic. "Fire Command says the 4th floor is fully involved," a sergeant yelled over the sirens. "They can't get the ladder truck close enough because of the wind and the overhang." "We have to go up," Miller said. "We have hostages." "Captain, it's an oven up there. We have no visibility. If we go in, we might not come out." Miller grit his teeth. "We go. Alpha team on me. Breaching charges. Gas masks on." The SWAT team moved up the stairwell, a column of black-clad warriors. They reached the 4th floor landing. The door was hot. Smoke was seeping through the jambs. Miller signaled. Breach. They hit the door with a ram. It flew open. A wall of black smoke hit them, followed by intense heat. Clear left. Clear right. They moved into the haze, their weapon lights cutting beams through the gloom. "Police call out!" Miller shouted. Silence. Just the roar of the fire and the hiss of sprinklers. They moved 19 meters, then 10. "Captain, look!" The point man said, his voice hushed. Through the swirling smoke, a shape emerged. It looked like a centipede. It was a chain of humans. Patients on sheets, patients in wheelchairs. Patients dragging each other. They were huddled low to the ground in the center of the hall, covered in wet blankets. "Get them out! Go, go!" Miller ordered. The SWAT officers slung their rifles and began grabbing patients, hauling them toward the stairwell. "Where is the nurse?" Miller asked Mr. Henderson as he dragged the big man to safety. "She went back." Henderson coughed, pointing into the orange glow at the end of the hall. "She went back for the kid." Miller looked down the hall. The ceiling was sagging. The structural integrity was failing. "Vance!" Miller screamed. "Vance!" No answer. "Captain, we have to pull back. The roof is coming down," the sergeant yelled. Miller hesitated. He knew the protocol. Never trade a life for a body. If she was in that inferno, she was gone. "Pull back," Miller ordered. "Get these people out." The team retreated the heavy fire door, slamming shut behind them, sealing the 4th floor. Elena wasn't dead, but she was close. She had made it to room 410. She found Leo hiding under his bed, screaming. She dragged him out, shielding his body with hers as burning ceiling tiles rained down. She got him to the hallway, but the path back to the stairwell was blocked by the collapse that had forced SWAT back. She was cut off. She looked around. The heat was baking her eyes. Her skin was blistering. She had Leo in her arms. He was light, maybe 60 pounds. "Hold on to my neck, Leo," she rasped. "Don't let go." She couldn't go back. She couldn't go forward. She looked at the window in room 410. It was a solid pane of reinforced glass, non-opening. St. Jude's was a suicide prevention facility as well. The windows were unbreakable. Elena grabbed a heavy oxygen tank from the corner. She swung it at the window. It bounced off. She swung again. A spiderweb crack appeared. She swung a third time, screaming with the effort, putting every ounce of her remaining strength into the blow. Smash! The glass shattered. The wind from the storm outside rushed in, feeding the fire, creating a backdraft effect. The door to the room slammed shut from the pressure change. Elena ran to the window. She looked down. 4 stories, 50 feet. Below on the concrete, she saw the lights of the police cars. She saw the fire trucks. She saw the extended ladder of the fire truck. It was fully extended, but the wind was whipping it around. It was still 10 feet away from the window and 5 feet below. It was too far to jump, especially with a child. But the fire was eating the door. It was coming through the wood. Elena climbed onto the sill. The rain lashed her face. "Leo!" she yelled over the wind. "Do you trust me?" The boy was sobbing, buried in her neck. "No." "Good," Elena said. "Trust gravity." She didn't jump for the ladder. She jumped for the drainage pipe running down the side of the building, 3 feet to her left. She launched herself into the void. Her right hand caught the rusted iron pipe. The wet metal was slick. Her grip slipped. She fell. She clawed at the pipe, her fingernails tearing. Her left arm, clutching the boy, was useless for climbing. Her hand caught a bracket. It held. Her shoulder wrenched with a sickening pop, a dislocation. She hung there 40 feet above the ground, dangling by one arm, the boy clinging to her chest. The fire roared out of the window she had just exited, a tongue of flame licking the air where she had stood seconds ago. "Hang on!" a voice shouted from below. The ladder truck was maneuvering. The firefighter in the bucket was extending his reach. "Grab my hand!" the firefighter screamed. He was still 4 feet away. Elena looked at her arm. It was spasming. She was losing her grip. "Take him!" Elena yelled. She swung her body using her last reserve of momentum. She swung toward the ladder. "Leo, reach!" The boy reached out. The firefighter lunged. He caught the boy's wrist. He pulled him into the bucket. Elena swung back toward the pipe. Her hand slammed against the wet metal. She slipped. She fell. The crowd below gasped. A collective scream rose from the onlookers. Elena fell 1 story, but she didn't hit the ground. As she passed the 3rd-floor window, her boot caught on a heavy external air conditioning unit bracket. It spun her around, slamming her body against the brick wall. She grabbed the grate of the AC unit with her good hand. She hung there, battered, burned, dislocated shoulder dangling, bleeding from a dozen cuts suspended 30 feet in the air. The firefighter in the bucket lowered the controls rapidly. The bucket descended. I got you, the firefighter yelled, maneuvering the basket under her feet. Elena let go. She collapsed into the basket, landing in a heap of wet scrubs and blood. The firefighter keyed his radio. I have the child, and I have the woman. She's alive. Repeat, the ranger is alive. As the bucket lowered to the ground, the crowd broke the police line. But it wasn't a mob. It was the staff. It was Dr. Halloway. It was Sarah. They ran toward the truck. When the basket touched the asphalt, Eleanor tried to stand up. She failed. Halloway was there. He grabbed her uninjured side. "I got you, Eleanor," Halloway said, tears streaming down his face. "I got you." Elena looked at him. Her face was black with soot. Her hair singed her eyes, haunted. "The Count," she whispered. "What? The head Count?" she rasped. "Did we get them all?" Halloway looked at Captain Miller, who had just run up. "We cleared the stairwell," Miller said. 11 patients, plus the boy. And you." "Thorn," Elena whispered. "Supply closet. Zip ties." Miller's eyes widened. "You got him out too?" Elena didn't answer. Her eyes rolled back in her head. Her knees buckled. She collapsed into Halloway's arms, the adrenaline finally ceding territory to the trauma. The ghost of Ward 4 had finally run out of fuel. The steady beep, beep, beep was the first thing Eleanor heard. For the first time in her life, she wasn't the one monitoring the machine. She was the one attached to it. She opened her eyes to the sterile white of the ICU. Dr. Marcus Halloway sat in a plastic chair by her bed, looking like he hadn't slept in 3 days. He wasn't wearing his white coat. "Welcome back, Sergeant," he whispered. "The patients." Elena rasped, her throat raw from the smoke. "All of them." Marcus smiled, tears brimming in his eyes. "Every single one made it out. Even the kid. You threw him into a firefighter's arms from 40 feet up." Elena nodded, relief washing over her battered body. She had 3 broken ribs, a dislocated shoulder, and second-degree burns across her back. Thorn was currently in the prison ward at Harborview, handcuffed to a bed with multiple fractures. He was done. "I read your file," Marcus said, his voice trembling. "For 3 years I treated you like furniture. I snapped at you. I ignored you. I didn't know I was standing next to a giant." "I just did my job," Eleanor murmured. "No, you did mine," Marcus countered. He leaned in, his expression haunted. "Thorn." Before he went down, he screamed that I was drunk that night 3 years ago, when his wife died. He looked at her, terrified of the answer. "Was I Elena? I was in a dark place then. I don't remember." Eleanor looked at the brilliant surgeon who had saved hundreds of lives. She remembered the smell of scotch on his breath that night. She remembered stepping in to steady his hand. But she also remembered that Mary Thorne had died of a massive embolism that no doctor, drunk or sober, could have stopped. "You were tired, Marcus." She lied, her voice steady and commanding. "You were sober. You did everything right." Marcus slumped back, the crushing weight of 3 years lifting from his shoulders. She had saved his life in the fire, and now, with that one mercy, she had saved his soul. 3 weeks later, the press filled the hospital lobby, clamoring for the Angel of St. Jude's. The mayor was there with a key to the city, but the podium remained empty. Up on the 4th floor, amidst the smell of fresh paint and drywall, Elena Vance stood at the nurse's station. Sarah Jenkins, no longer glued to her phone, walked up and handed her a small box. "We know you hate the spotlight, but the staff, we needed to do this." Inside was a new name badge. It didn't just say Eleanor Vance, RN. It read Eleanor Vance, Ranger, Charge Nurse. "Charge Nurse?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "That means more paperwork." "It means you run the show," Marcus said, stepping off the elevator. "Though I think you always have." Eleanor clipped the badge to her scrubs. She looked at her team not just co-workers anymore, but a squad. She took a deep breath. The war was over, but the mission never ended. "All right," Eleanor said, her voice sharp. "Show's over. Mrs. Gable needs her meds. Let's get to work." She turned and walked down the hall, silent as a ghost ready for the night watch. And that is the story of Eleanor Vance. It's a story that reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes, and they don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear frayed scrubs and comfortable shoes. Sometimes the person saving your life is the one person you never bothered to say hello to. In a world obsessed with loud voices and viral moments, Eleanor teaches us the power of quiet competence. She teaches us that true strength isn't about how much noise you make, but about what you are willing to do when the lights go out and the fear sets in. It makes you wonder, who are the quiet warriors in your life? Who is the person in your office, your school, or your hospital who seems invisible but might be holding the whole place together? If this story had you on the edge of your seat, please hit that like button. It helps us find more incredible stories like this one. And if you want to be part of our squad, subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We have a new story dropping next week about a deep-sea welder who found something in the Mariana Trench that the government tried to hide. You do not want to miss that.